Recording. Good. So, as I said, a huge warm welcome to everybody this evening. So, thank you for joining us for our final session. And the sessions have been brought to you from the RCGP Vale of Trent faculty, the Derbyshire Hub Plus, Nottingham Phoenix Programme, and the Lincolnshire Training Hub. So it's been a nice collaboration of the area. And as I say, we've covered a number of things, including practicalities, we've covered psychological transitions, pensions and finances. But first of all, I just want to really try and get an idea of who's in the room this evening. So I'm going to see if I can, oh, where's my poll? I'm going to run a poll, okay, just to ask you 3 questions. I'm hoping that you can all see some questions. Can somebody just give me a thumbs up? Just to show me that you can see something. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's brilliant. So there's a question on when you're thinking about retiring. There's a question about what you're going to do around retirement. And there's a question about whether you've got any concerns. So I'm just going to give you a moment to complete that. Thank you. It's just going to give you a few more seconds just to finish that off. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. So let's see, what have we got? So hopefully you'll all be able to see. So when do you intend to retire? So 3 of the 16 of us here are already retired and not working. Hurrah! That sounds like a nice place to be. Some of you are retired but still working. That's 13%. So 2 of us are going to be retiring the next 12 months. And then we've got a few retiring the next 1 to 3 years, and a similar distribution for the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, so we're all stages in the lead up. So what are we considering doing? Okay, so somebody's thinking of retiring completely. That's about 25%. We've got almost 50% retiring from GP role but continuing to work clinically. That's interesting. Okay, so you don't completely want to hang up your stethoscopes necessarily. Some people want to retire from being GP but work non-clinically. Other people want to work in something else unrelated. And have we got any retire returns? Can't see. Bear with me. Yeah, we have. Okay. So I'm thinking about any concerns. Okay. Financial concerns, yeah. So do be sure to get some financial advice. Losing identity, yeah, that's a huge one. And we will come into that one a little bit more. Missing your team and social support and being bored. Yeah, so quite a nice spread. Okay, but finance, interestingly, is the one that's the smallest there. Okay. So thank you for doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start sharing my screen with you just to go through a few slides. So hopefully you'll all be able to see that. So as I said before, this is coming as a collaboration, joint collaboration. So with Royal College of GP, Vale of Trent faculty, Derbyshire Hub, Lincoln Training Hub 2. So let's see if I can move on my screen. So we've got 3 key aims this evening. The first is to consider what your career transition might look like, okay? I'm particularly thinking about what your identity might be as you pass through the next few years and thinking about your exit plan. We're going to think about how you can get involved in other clinical or non-clinical opportunities. Obviously wanting to maintain a balance, but also to keep things going that perhaps are of main interest for you. And thinking about how, with your valuable time, you can recognise what's important for you in the future. So, as well as that, what I'm delighted to say that we're going to have a number of speakers from not only our local workforce support organisations and the RCGP, but we've also got representatives from the National Retained GP Scheme. We've got people talking about interesting things that they've done in their late career, things like volunteering, research, pathways improvement, fellowships. So I want to wish them a warm welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. So the main aim really, okay, is to consider what is important for you. And of course, that will be unique to you, not to anybody else. Okay. But first of all, you need to bear in mind, okay, that work really does provide some important human needs. And importantly, all of these three must be met in retirement, but this will need to be through your own initiative. So you might want to consider what has been driving you up until this point, i.e., what are your values and what have been your motivations to get you this far? So thinking about going forward, how your must-haves are going to be met in the future, and so how you're going to navigate your late career and through into retirement. Really important to consider, what will the structure of your life look like? Okay, how utilised do you actually want to be? Okay, consider the narrative, okay, of where you want to be, okay, how you're going to engage, thinking about what is your community going to look like, and think about your purpose. What are you going to do? Okay, what's going to help you to engage? What will your personal identity be?
No.
And consider the positives, the changes and benefits of retirement.
You ready, Nick?
Whoever's talking, let me just mute you. Or if you can mute, everybody mute, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So the important thing just to remember, of course, is that you can pick and choose what you do. So it's entirely up to you. You can slow down, you can speed up, you can find other intellectual stimulation, and you can carry on doing things that you enjoy. So moving on. The poll already got you thinking a little bit about any concerns you've got relating to retirement. And there's plenty of preparation that you can do to actually mitigate and reduce these concerns. So if you are concerned that finance it may be a problem, okay, and you may not have the financial means to support your retirement, I would urge you to get some specialist advice. Talk to your accountant, talk to the BMA, get pension projections really early. Perhaps employ somebody to help you through the process. Get some special advice through Wesleyan or PG Mutual. Talk to your bank. Talk to your colleagues. There are so many ways of getting support with your financial situation. Thinking about your identity as a practicing doctor. So the narrative of who you are is going to change in late career and going into retirement. You may need to give yourself some space to recognise there's something important about reflecting that your identity will change in relation to yourself. Now, for many doctors, our role is strongly connected to our identity and who we are. So as you transition away from work, what will happen is that you will stop working and you will stop being a doctor at some stage. Now, letting go of one identity to a new one can, for some people, be like a bereavement and really shouldn't be underestimated. But being aware of this up front can help the transition, and thinking about your purpose and structure will help you with that transition. If you're concerned about missing out on team working and social support, don't forget that you can keep those connections going. Okay, but there may actually be other outlets for getting support. There may be new interests or hobbies or activities you get engaged with. And thinking about becoming bored, okay, or not getting enough stimulation, take this opportunity to start thinking about how do you want to spend your time? What do you want to do? Is there something that you want to start? Anything that you want to take up again that perhaps you've left when you had kids or were working, didn't have time? Consider what really brings you pleasure and fulfillment. Remember, you can do anything, but probably not everything. But having a plan of what you're going to do is really going to help you not to be bored. Now, there may be some people in the room who actually don't have any concerns about retirement and they just can't wait. So good for you. And hopefully we'll all be in that situation soon. So there's an interesting quote from somebody called Cronin, and it says, "One does not simply have something to retire from, but must have something to retire to." So what are you thinking about going to? Just think, some people might need a break before they move on to new things or other things. And just think that retirement is a really good way of letting go of an old way of working and being, okay, and also of embracing something new. So consider that there may be some absolute must-haves or the things that you know that you really want to do. So think about, when are you going to retire? Okay, what will that look like? Will my late career change? Do I need to change my role? Do I want to carry on with my undifferentiated GP work, or do I want to do something slightly restricted or something clinical but not related to the normal general practice role? So you may do a phased return, or you may do a sudden retirement. And then consider, what are you going to do with your time? And how will you cope with changes? We know that mental preparation and practical preparations can be really helpful as your role changes. So how are you going to make these changes work? And consider, what does success look like or mean to you in the next phase? And planning your narrative and how you're going to do it can be really helpful and make an easier adjustment. Consider how you want to build in familiar or wanted routines, and build some good new behaviours and habits, and decide what really is your purpose going to be. And around the purpose, consider what is the things, or are the things, that are really important to you. I've come across a really good book, which is called You Coach You by Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis, and I'll share these resources later. And in this book, it helps you to kind of pose yourself some self-coaching questions, and it's relevant to all stages of career. And it can really help you take control of the planning and the sort of manoeuvring as you get into your late career and into retirement. So, as I've said before, we know that work can be a huge part of our identity. And we also know that retirement will release you from this work identity. One big thing to consider is, will you consider continuing to use the title doctor? Now, this is a very personal decision, and often will strike at the heart of who we are. And there's absolutely no right or wrong about it. It's really what feels right to you. As you go through your late career, you're likely to be doing some transitioning through restructuring of your life. And again, as I've said, is this going to be gradual, or is this going to be fairly sudden? The benefit of a gradual transition is that it can help to get you sort of experiencing being at home and doing other things, as well as doing other bits of work. But thinking about interacting, if you're at home a bit more, consider, how are you going to interact, okay, or experience being at home with other people? There may be an adjustment needed. You might need to have a conversation beforehand to think about setting boundaries or parameters to look after yourself in this phase. Because if you're around at home, you need to consider, what are you available to do and what are you available not to do, and be very clear on your roles and set boundaries. For example, when my husband doesn't work on a Monday and I'm working from home, in my head, the plan is that he should be doing all the household jobs, okay, and doing the stuff that needs doing. But in his head, he wants to go for a bike ride and meet up with his mates who aren't working, or do the things that he wants. Okay, so you need to have a conversation to work out who's going to do what, and what your purpose is going to be. And as you're detaching from work, you need to consider, who are you going to keep in touch with? Okay, and how will you maintain or potentially strengthen those relationships with those people if you're not seeing them quite so regularly? You might want to engage with them, obviously, in a completely different way. Okay, but you might also want to engage and support other people. Okay, which is an option through things like mentoring or coaching or educating or volunteering work. And consider, how are you going to proactively manage the transition or the liminal phase, i.e. changing from the old to the new? And then how will you build on that? How will you consolidate that to really get yourself into the new zone? So life restructuring can also mean role restructuring. I know many of you will probably have several roles, okay, not just in your work area potentially, but also outside. Okay, you may be a partner, a parent, a committee member, a friend, family, you may have sports, interests, hobbies, those kinds of things. Okay. In your later career and retirement, this is a really obvious time to consider, whether you want to continue these roles, okay, or if you want them to continue, whether they need to change somehow. You might decide to hold on to some and not to others. It can be useful exercise to consider all of the roles that you've actually got, okay, and apportion the time and energy that you spend on each of these currently, okay, and think going forward, what would you like that to look like instead? Some people who are visual people might like to do this as a kind of a pictorial thing. So draw a big circle, okay, and put like a spoke of a bicycle, okay, each roll into a little wedge, a bit like a Trivial Pursuits wedge, okay, and thinking about what you've got now, transfer that onto another one as to what you see happening. Consider with all those roles, what do you find rewarding? And if you didn't have it, what would you miss? Is there anything that you really love about it? Do you want to continue it? And as it is at the moment, is this how you want it to be? Or would you want it to change somehow? So take the time to consider what it will look like. And don't forget, if you're a busy kind of person that fills up all your time, you are likely to be busy when you are getting into your late career and retiring. We covered some of the transitions from a psychological point of view in our second session, but just to remind you of the 3 stages, and for those who weren't able to join us, there are 3 stages as you transition. Okay, this is the first one, and this is worked according to William Bridges' model. The first one is the stage where you are letting something go, where you're perhaps coming to an ending, you might be losing something. And the first part about this is accepting the ending. Stage 2 is all about the liminal phase, the transition, or the in-between bit between the ending and the new beginning. And the third stage is the new beginning. Now, we know that people spend different amounts of time in each of those zones, but there are some tips that can help you to navigate each of those stages. Stage 1 tips include admitting to yourself that the change is occurring, okay, or has occurred. So actively preparing for and getting as much information as you possibly can to understand what the change is all about, and leaning into or acknowledging what is going on and what is going to be gained can be really helpful. It can be really helpful to have a mindset that accepts that this kind of transition is not right or wrong, it's different. Stage 2, where you're in the kind of in-between zone, this is often the most uncomfortable stage for many people. And it can be a time of great confusion for some people. But it's integral between the ending and the new beginning, so you have to pass through it. So it can be really helpful to set yourself some short-term goals, or even identify some low-hanging fruit or quick wins to move through that uncertainty. And spend some time taking stock of what you need to accomplish the goals, and think about identifying the opportunities that will help you to move forward through this phase. Feel free to look backward towards the ending. Acknowledge what you've had, but also use it as a possibility to look forward to the beginning, but also the possibilities and new things that it can create for you. And I would urge you to think about connecting to your values. Again, think what has driven you and what has motivated you up until this point. Because when you feel uncertain and confused, your personal values can help you to provide direction. In the third stage, you need to start using the clarity that you've gained in the neutral zone, okay, in that transition phase, and accept the challenge of working in a different way, or maybe not working at all if you're retiring, and existing in this changed new environment. You can think of this as a fresh start, but think of these strategies as you settle into your new beginning. People recommend that you jump right in to meet new people, particularly if you're taking on new hobbies or getting new habits built. Think about how are you going to tackle new problems or challenges? Because it may be that your support system looks quite different, okay, to how it did in the past. So consider what strategies you might use, okay, now if you come across any problems or difficulties. Consider what has helped in the past and who has helped in the past. Can any of those things be taken forward to support you going into a new challenge? And do find ways to mark your success. Acknowledge all those small wins. So consider what are the new things that you're really looking forward to, because it is important to identify things to look forward to soon after retirement. So some of you may want to leave general practice completely, but still interact with patients. So what options are there? Now, this is probably not everything, but it's quite a few. So feel free to, oops, sorry, I'm just going to go back. So if you've got anything else in mind, feel free to put it in the chat and we can come across it later. So you may wish to work in an extended role or special interest. You may wish to take up sort of bespoke salary posts, which may be restricted in scope. And remember, if you will continue to work clinically, NHS England has now confirmed that you can undertake a limited scope of work in a primary care setting with no restrictions. However, you must stick to your scope of practice and you need to show that you're keeping up to date as you would ordinarily in your chosen or agreed area of work. So you may get to do family planning, so LARC procedures, for instance. You may take on the running of or support of a nursing home. There are lots of different ways that you can work as a medical support worker. In hospices, potentially, you might work in an urgent care setting, potentially out of hours, or a GP and A&E, or working for NHS 111. Some doctors work for local home visiting services, and this can work very well. Thinking about specialist interests like drug clinics or working with the homeless, or taking on a role as a prison or police doctor can be something people do. Working as a Department of Work and Pensions assessor, working with refugees, asylum seekers, possibly occupational health. Consider the opportunities that might arise through your PCN or your place, or even across the ICB or the ICS footprint. Some people have taken up the role of medical examiner recently as the changes have come into practice. Other people are doing research in general practice. So there are lots and lots of different things that you can do that is not just undifferentiated general practice. But what if you've had enough of clinical medicine? What other avenues can you pursue? Well, there are plenty. So, and this list is not exhaustive, but think about academic research, being a teacher or examiner, sharing your wisdom, perhaps with undergraduates or postgraduates, working as a mentor or coach. As an appraiser, you can continue to work appraising GPs up to 2 years post cessation of clinical work. You could work on a committee such as the LCGP or BMA or other committees. You could be a CQC advisor, you could work with the GMC, you can get a non-exec director post or become a charity trustee or even volunteer. You could go into medical legal work, do PLAB examining work. So lots and lots of options there. There are a number of other non-clinical ideas, lots of volunteering suggestions and interests there. And Jeremy, who's going to talk to us a little bit later, has developed a really nice leaflet of some suggestions, which I'll share with you afterwards. Think about what your interests are. You know, you may wish to do some volunteering based on that. Thinking about coaching and chairperson, you can look at vistage.co.uk for opportunities. Again, there's a link to become non-exec directors. You might want to get involved with invigilation at schools or universities. And getting involved with the legal system, potentially becoming an associate with the magistrates and doing sort of medical work on behalf of the legal system. Getting involved with boards, so boardappointments.co.uk has opportunities. And for women, you can get on womenonboards.net, but you have to have a subscription for that. You might get involved with tribunal work, become an expert witness. And there are lots of possibilities and things often that you can find through things like LinkedIn. So consider where might you look for these opportunities. Now, something slightly different. Planned happenstance is a career theory developed by a guy called John Krumboltz. And this sort of really emphasizes that as much as we can plan what's going to happen, okay, actually, it's really important that you are prepared for and can capitalize on unplanned opportunities rather than solely relying on your rigid career planning. And sometimes unpredictable chance events can have quite a significant impact, okay, on opening doors or finding out about opportunities. So going in with a mindset of curiosity, okay, asking the people around you, what do they do? How did they get there? You know, what does that role involve? Okay. Asking them, what are the challenges and obstacles, okay, to those. And if you've got an idea of what you want to do, okay, don't give up, okay, if you know what you want to go for, but be prepared to be flexible and to have some adaptability. Other ideas for later career can come through things like government policies, which may impact positively or negatively, but may therefore present opportunities. Things like technological developments can also create opportunities. Think about how much artificial intelligence is coming into clinical practice. Okay, think about transcription and all the IT changes that we've had over the last years. If you're interested in those kinds of things, that might be a role that you can get into. Consider what areas of expertise where there may be a shortage or surplus of labour, or where there's, you know, some opportunities that's there. You may have skills that you haven't used potentially that could be used in these areas. Or you might develop a new area or get into a new area that's developing and help that to grow. And consider that as you've navigated through, you know, often a couple of decades or even 3 decades of being a GP, you have got immense knowledge, skills, and expertise. Okay. And these can be applied to other things. So consider, how can you use those skills, okay, if you wish to. And if you're thinking about a new direction, what skills can you transfer? But are there any new skills that you need? And what knowledge do you need? So I'm going to stop sharing now. And that's really just to sort of whet your appetite, okay, to give you a few ideas, okay, of things that are out there. What I'd like to do now, though, is to invite several of my colleagues to talk to you a little bit about some of the interesting things that they have got up to or that are open to you in your late career. And they will introduce themselves. But firstly, I just want to say an enormous thank you to all of them for attending, because without you, okay, these kind of events don't occur, and it's because of the interest that you take, we get to hear about these, and we can think about the opportunities available to us. So first of all, I'd really like to invite Lisa Steiner to join us. Lisa, are you happy to unmute? There we go.
I am.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Lisa?
I certainly will. Yeah. Hi. Oh, shall I go? I'll show my screen momentarily. Hold on. So I'm Lisa Steiner. I am a GP in sunny Sneinton, also approaching the end of my career, in fact. But so I'm a GP. I'm a GP appraiser. I'm program director for Nottingham. But the reason I'm here today is also because I'm associate postgraduate dean for various things in the East Midlands, one of which is the retention scheme. So the GP retention scheme, not GP retention in its broader sense, although I try and help a bit with that as well, but it's mainly about the national retention scheme, which, as it stands at the moment, we have about 90 retained GPs, some of whom are around the table actually today, in the East Midlands, and I help approve their applications and their renewals each year. And it's a really good opportunity for people perhaps approaching the end of their career, if they wish to step down in terms a little bit of the intensity and the responsibility of being in general practice, but actually continue to work clinically, which many people want to do, but perhaps with shorter hours or more flexibility, and perhaps potential for annualized hours and working less weeks of the year and things. So I would commend it to everybody. What's going to happen with all the changes that are going about, I've got no idea, but at the moment we haven't heard anything, so we're carrying on business as usual and eternally optimistic that it will all continue as it is. I'll very briefly share, I'm happy to share the slides afterwards as well. I'll just very briefly talk through just a couple of minutes on the slides, because people always want to know a little bit about the bare bones of the scheme itself. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me see. How about that?
Yes, we can
See
see
that?
it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So in brief, as I say, that's who I am. Right. The fundamental thing about the retention scheme is the premise of it is in order to support GPs who would be lost to the general practice workforce were it not for the support, flexibility, and extra CPD that the retention scheme offers. So that's the first thing. Would you be lost to the retention to general practice? And actually, many people nearing retirement might be, because they might say, well, actually, if it was less intense, I might stay, but if it was not, then I might go. So would you be lost to the GP workforce without support and flexibility? You must meet all the eligibility criteria, and I'll briefly come onto that in the next slide, just very briefly. But by approaching retirement, that's already one of the big eligibility criteria covered. Yeah. It's funded by the ICB, who we know are going through a state of flux, but at the moment, if we are putting forward eligible applications, and I only put forward eligible applications and make a compelling argument for that, then the ICBs are currently funding it. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but that's what's happened at the moment, and we haven't had any applications turned down in the East Midlands in these regions. South of the patch, a few, because basically ICBs don't have any ring fence funding, but at the moment we keep applying and they're continuing to approve them at the minute. So basically people say, well, can you find me a practice? In fact, that isn't quite how it works. The retained GP is a salaried GP. They're employed by a GP practice of their choosing. There's some light touch supervision. It doesn't have to be a training practice, but it does have to have somebody there who's prepared to do a bit of educational support. So they would be expected to have a little bit of a background in education, either from supervising R's roles or medical students or foundation doctors, but it doesn't have to be a GP training practice. You need a detailed job plan. You need some CPD, a significant amount of CPD actually to support your activity, and some supervision, educational supervision during your clinical time. You can do up to 208 sessions per year, which is basically about 4 a week. Maximum that's funded, although there is scope to do other stuff beyond that. So some people do their clinical role and they do other stuff beyond their clinical role, but 208 sessions is how many you would be funded for that. You get a bursary. If you do 4 sessions, you can get a bursary for up to £4,000 a year, which helps pay for your expenses, courses, indemnity, and various other sundries of being a less than full-time GP. And the practice gets £76.92 per session for the retained GP, which actually works out as if you did 1 session a week, that would be £4,000 the practice would be reimbursed to support the additional activity, and up to £16,000. So there is money to the practice. I've heard some people say, oh, the retention, oh, that's just cheap GPs. That's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be senior GPs or people who are needing a bit of additional support, but the practice is recompensed for their time. They're not cheap GPs, they're highly valued GPs who have particular terms and conditions for their employment. Briefly moving on, the eligibility criteria, which you're very welcome to look at afterwards, but basically it's open to all doctors who meet all the following criteria: where you're seriously considering leaving, such as retiring, which may be for personal reasons, or that you're approaching retirement, or that you might need greater flexibility to undertake either work within or without general practice. Yeah, so I have quite a lot of people who have a lot of other roles in the ICB or education, or dealing in fair trade coffee, doesn't really matter. But actually, if that would prevent you from working in general practice, that would give you an eligibility criterion. But also, it's important to say a regular part-time role doesn't suit your requirements. So, for example, you might be looking after frail elderly relatives and you have to be on call for that, or disabled children who require a lot of input and you therefore couldn't do a technically 9 to 5, but I think we all know that salary jobs tend to be running from 8 till 6:30 these days, and that wouldn't work around your caring responsibilities or your other requirements. Yeah. But also, it may be that you need extra additional supervision. So if you're only doing 1 or 2 sessions, you might need that extra CPD and supervision to keep up to date with your mandatory training, such as your safeguarding and all of those kind of things. Yeah. So you have to meet all of those eligibility criteria. The form is quite onerous and long, but actually it does give you an opportunity to demonstrate how you meet all of the eligibility criteria which are required in order to convince the ICB that you're worthy of funding. Yeah. So next steps. Does this sound a great idea? Some people are thinking, well, actually, I'm in my practice, but actually I want to step down. I've been a partner and I want to work much less, or I actually might need a new change and I might look for another practice. if you're thinking about it and wondering about the eligibility criteria, by all means run it past us. There's in the team, there is currently, as we speak, we have a program administrator called Victoria, and I'm the educational lead. And I have a couple of TPDs and PSELs who work with me, and they have some scope along with me to have discussions about whether you're eligible, a bit more explanation about the scheme and how that might look and how that might work in terms of proceeding with that. And if you feel that you are eligible and you want to proceed with that, you would find a practice that would meet with your needs, and that might be your own practice that you already know, or it might be approaching other practices. It is a tricky time in terms of recruitment at the moment, just being realistic about it, but actually there are practices who are looking for retention doctors, so it is worth approaching practices that you think might be a good fit for you and seeing what they would think. And sometimes people are actually applying for salary doctors, and actually we've had retained GPs say, actually I don't want a 6-session salary job, but would you like me for 3 sessions because I'm very experienced and I've got an interest in dermatology or women's health? And it's like, thank you very much, that would be very nice, thank you very much. So it is worth asking around and seeing who is around. And I do have a very, very short limited database of practices who think they're in the running for recruiting retained GPs, but actually at the moment, with the practice finances being quite uncertain, they haven't really been able to proceed with that. But I'm hoping that with the new contract coming in, people might feel a bit more optimistic about recruiting new people, because fundamentally they're taking on somebody as a salaried GP who has special terms and conditions, and they're committing to employing you for probably 5 years as a minimum. So that's it's a recruitment decision that they need to take quite seriously. Okay, so you check your eligibility, find a practice, agree terms and conditions, have a contract no less favourable than the BMA model contract from retained GPs, make a joint application, forward it to me, and you might have a discussion with me, or I might have a look at the forms. If you've already had a pre-discussion and it's very clear that it all ticks all the boxes, I may not necessarily meet you again, but I'll be happy to do so. We forward it to the ICB, who makes a decision, yay or nay, depending on, depending on what the ICB make their decisions on, but they generally do if we put a compelling application together. If it's accepted, you have an annual renewal process just to check you continue to be eligible, and you can do it for up to 5 years, and it can be extended, for example, if you have maternity leave, illness, or anything else, but generally 5 years is the maximum generally. And at the moment, I'm saying it takes 8 weeks. It can take longer because between changes at NHSE and ICB, there are many people who are no longer in post, so it's just taking a bit longer. So bear with. And the only other thing to say about the retention scheme, sometimes people start or in their practice and they say, oh, I've started on the retention scheme, the application hasn't gone in, can it be backdated? And the ICB won't do that. So you have to either wait to be approved or to be working in some other capacity, because they won't backdate it. They'll only do it from when it's technically approved by the scheme. There's some links there. There's me, and there's the programme lead, Victoria, and some links to NHSE. Some of that information, it's the national stuff, but it's a little bit outdated. It talks about CCGs and all sorts, which have gone. But anyway, it's generally fairly up to date. And the BMA, it can be very useful to advise on contracts and things, because it's sometimes that's where people get a bit, it's trickier, and I don't advise on employment issues because otherwise I'll get into very deep trouble advising about things about which I know very little. I'm the educational lead, but I would forward everybody to the BMA to get advice on their contracts. Sorry that I spoke quicker and quicker and quicker because I only had 5 minutes, and I think I took longer, and I read my slides very quickly. But did anybody, I'm very happy to field questions at this point or afterwards. I know that time is ticking on, so if anybody wanted to ask anything, very welcome to catch up with me another time if that would work better. Claire's thinking time's ticking on, stop talking, Lisa. So I will stop talking.
No, it's fine, we're good for time actually, Lisa. So if anybody has got a question for Lisa, I think it'd be helpful perhaps to field it now. Anybody got anything for Lisa?
Stunned silence.
Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, hi Lisa.
Hi.
I'm a retainer on the scheme, and
yes,
it has been great for me. Just a question generally, and it might be relevant to people if they're going to be moving out of the area, but I did chat to a mentee recently who said Yorkshire were really not funding anybody. They kind of allowed somebody to apply, but they kind of gave a really bleak expectation of whether funding would be allowed, and they hadn't had anybody accepted for 18 months. Do you know if, obviously it sounds as if the Midlands is quite doing quite well, but do you have any information about any other geographical areas?
I know that I wouldn't rush to practice in Northampton because I know that they are very strict. We have had people applying who clearly have compelling reasons to be on the scheme. The difficulty is I only permit applications locally to go through if you meet all the eligibility criteria, and that's very clear on the form. However, I've had comments about, well, I don't think that's exceptional. You know, you've got one disabled child, but you haven't got three, or Granny's quite frail, but she's not that frail. Surely you could probably do a job around it. So I think it's quite difficult to demonstrate because I think it's supposed to be an exceptional need as opposed to a regular need. And many people have what I would consider to be very, very reasonable reasons why they should be on the retained GP scheme. But the ICB, because basically the ICB have no ring fence funding for this, they've kind of acquired it from the CCG and it's part of their spend. And I have literally had a conversation with an ICB person saying, well, if we fund this retainer, we won't be able to do our leg ulcer clinic. And it's like, actually, I'm really, really sorry about your leg ulcer clinic, but that's not the problem with the retained GP. You know, they fulfill the criteria and it's a nationally dictated scheme and they meet the eligibility criteria. But so that's not very helpful, is it? But in summary, I think that there will be a shake-up, I think, in terms of funding and money. But at the moment, in the East Midlands, nearly everybody has been accepted. I think the difficulty is some people have 3 disabled children, and actually those disabled children become disabled adults and they don't have less care needs when they grow up. In fact, they have more care needs because they're not at school all of the time, and the scheme is very much 5 years and then ... And actually some people actually continue to have those needs long term, but at the moment it's 5 years, although I have had a couple of people who've been reaccepted as a new retained GP and been given more time because there's an understanding that their circumstances are very exceptional. But it's tricky because it costs money, and it is important because it does support people. And as I say, I've got a number of people who are in work at the moment because of the retained GP scheme around the table and elsewhere. But the ICBs are thinking that's £4,000 a session, that's £16,000 they're paying to a practice. There are some practices who have more than one retainer, and I certainly think that in other areas they're saying, well, okay, you can have one per practice, but actually perhaps you can't have more because some practices have got several, 2 or 3 retainers, and that would seem inequitable when another practice down the road hasn't got anybody to support in that way. So I think that is potentially a direction of travel. So I don't think I've answered that question at all, really, apart from watch this space, keep applying, because if we don't apply, then there won't be a need. And I think there's a broader question about if salaried jobs were not so very pressured, then we would not have so many people feeling that the only way that they could continue in general practice is to be on the retention scheme, because otherwise they would have an unmanageable workload. So there's something about the bigger picture about making GP jobs manageable to people who are not on the scheme. But that's definitely beyond my remit, but that needs to be addressed as well, and hopefully that will be. But
okay, thank you.
Is that all right? That wasn't really, I didn't really answer your question. At the moment, keep applying, and hope springs eternal, and we will see. But I don't have any intel that they're gonna stop, but it is a concern because it's happening elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Jane, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Lisa, are you not concerned now that ICBs have been mandated to reduce their costs by 50%? I mean, ICBs have been mandated to reduce their costs by 50%, and NHSE that run the scheme have been completely disbanded. So what could possibly go wrong? But there remains a need, and I don't think that need is going to go away. But how it will be met, I don't know, and I've spoken to colleagues much higher up at NHSE than myself, and they don't know either. I think nobody knows. So I'm going to carry on doing my job until somebody tells me there's no money and it changes, and I will see what comes of it, really. I think that's the reality of the world in which we live. What I would also say is the other hat that I have, and I have had some people who have decided that they didn't want any more about general practice, and I also look after the return to practice scheme. If you decide that you're going to retire, hang on.
if you're absolutely sure that you never want to be a GP ever again, by all means come off the performers list. But if there is a glimmer and you think, gosh, I'm very tired, maybe I have 6 months off, I would commend you to stay on the performers list as long until you are absolutely, completely and utterly sure that you never wish to be on it again. Because whilst there is a return to practice scheme, which is supposed to be easier for people to get back on the performers list, and I run that as well, it is quite hard to get back into practice, because you would often, if a break of more than 2 years has happened, you often have to go to a clinical placement, and they are perishingly hard to find because practices are full, and they unfortunately don't seem to be very keen to take on the older end of the spectrum. So the people who have returned to practice after a break, who've got GMC numbers lower than mine, which is sort of in the 300s, you know, 3 whatevers, have found it very difficult because practices haven't got room to take them in clinical placement, and getting back on the performers list is quite tricky. So I wouldn't come off it unless you're sure you never want to be on it ever again.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Lisa.
That's right.
Neil is asking, what do you have to do to stay on the performers list? Just not resign from it? It's something to do with PCSE, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, I think you have to basically, it is basically about engaging in revalidation and appraisal. So you have to engage in revalidation and appraisal, and there is an issue if you're working less than 40 sessions per year, because whilst that isn't an absolute cutoff in terms of appraisal, it makes them feel a bit queasy if you're doing less than 40 sessions, because they would consider that might not be enough to keep up to date. So if you're doing more than 40 sessions per year in undifferentiated general practice and engaging actively in the appraisal and revalidation process, that is probably enough to keep your performers list ticking over. So I would suggest doing a bit, not nothing, and keeping in touch and asking the performers list. The professional standards people are very reasonable, and they don't want to lose people, and they don't want people to go for no reason. So by all means, get some advice from them if you're thinking of reducing or having a career break or whatever else, because staying on it is better. Yeah.
Thank you. Very wise words. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Lisa. And please, if anybody's interested, do get in touch with Lisa. And thanks, Lisa, for being such an advocate of the scheme. I personally am benefiting from it. And yes, so long may it last.
Long may it last. I know, long may it last. I think we just have to, I think the trouble is if you think, oh, it's not going to happen, and people don't apply, then there won't be a need for it. So I think we just keep sending applications and hope that they continue to get through, and cross our fingers.
Yeah. Lovely, thanks very much. So I'm going to move on now. So I'd like to invite Jeremy. Jeremy, you're up next, as I can't see Julie. So if Julie joins, she can join later. But are you good to go, Jeremy? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks very much, Claire. Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Jeremy. 2 years ago, I was a participant in the senior, whatever you call them, these seminars, senior clinical seminars. And then I retired from general practice about 18 months ago. But continued to work 3 sessions as doing community dermatology in mid-knots. Claire's asked me to talk about volunteering. And if I just call up my screen, can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Let's see how I move it forward. No, can't move it forward. There must be a way of moving it forward. There we go. Right, that's fine. Here, start with a quote which I quite like from Audrey Hepburn. I'll let you read that. So why volunteer? Well, as you start to think about retirement, what's the first thing that everybody says to you? What are you going to do with all of your time? You've got to fill it with something, haven't you? All these good ideas that Claire has been giving us. Volunteering can help with personal growth and fulfillment. As GPs, we hope we've made a positive contribution to our local community for many years, and we may like to continue to do that after we've retired. And you can use your existing skills or grow new ones. I've got a little link to a load of different volunteering opportunities, which I'll share with you at the end. But some of them include general volunteering opportunities, working in the healthcare sector, either in hospitals or in a hospice, mentoring and teaching roles, and international volunteering. And there are different links to a range of things. I'm afraid I hadn't realized that there were so many people not from Nottinghamshire. I do apologize. So most of the links, or some of the links, relate to Nottinghamshire opportunities. But I'm sure if you put the same thing in and Google Derbyshire or Lincolnshire, you'll come up with some sensible links. One of the things that I've started to do since I retired from practice is to teach and mentor refugee doctors. The Lincolnshire Refugee Doctors Project is one of several different projects around the country, which helps doctors who come to England, come to Britain as refugees. If you've been working as a doctor in your own country and come to England, the process of getting registered with the GMC is incredibly complicated. You need to demonstrate that you're proficient in English. It's called the Occupational English Test. You have to take a theoretical clinical exam, PLAB 1, and a practical clinical exam, PLAB 2. So I've been helping a Turkish doctor with his English proficiency. And last night I was teaching doctors from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Syria, Turkey, and Sudan about dermatology. All done online, of course. I really enjoy it. And there's some links to the different organizations on the resource sheet. Another thing which I've been fortunate to do for very many years is to teach family medicine, what we would know as general practice, in India. Here I am with a group of my students. This was in February, just gone. And I think that you'll agree that most of the things which I taught them, which you can see on this slide, probably be within the scope of most people in the seminar. None of it's rocket science. For me, I love it. I meet lots of interesting people. I love teaching and find it really rewarding. Even though I'm towards the end of my career, I still have something useful to contribute. And of course, there's the opportunity to travel. I have to show you one of my holiday snaps. Here I am at 12,000 feet in the Himalayas last summer. You don't get that in Nottinghamshire, do you? And another quote to end. The first one was anatomy. This one's physiology. If you've got a phone which does such things, there's a QR code which will link you through to the Google Doc with all the volunteering resources on it. Otherwise, Claire will circulate the link at the end. I don't know if there's time for any questions, Claire, but otherwise, thanks very much for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, definitely a couple of minutes for questions, if anybody would like to ask something. Can I just ask, how did you get involved, first of all, Jeremy, particularly with the abroad one? How did that come about?
It was somebody who was working, who did some of the teaching overseas, and she happened to know my parents and said to my parents, "Oh, you know, there's an opportunity to teach general practice in India." So it was through a personal link.
Okay. And thinking about sort of working locally in Nottingham with the other doctors, how did you get involved with that?
Language learning and teaching is something I've very much enjoyed. And after I retired, I did an English teaching qualification, a TEFL qualification, and then that then allowed me to help with teaching English to people from overseas.
do you need a visa or work visa or anything like that, or are you a tourist? How is it difficult?
Yeah, so
is it easy to organise?
it's not very easy to organise. I have had an employment visa in the past. India have recently changed the regulation, so I can go on a tourist visa.
Right.
But I've been doing it for several years, and it's always been a little bit challenging, the visa situation. Yeah.
Couple of comments in the chat. So Margaret's been usefully employed previously as a doctor for the Commonwealth Games. That sounds very interesting, Margaret. You're telling us that there's one coming up in, is it Glasgow, did you say? And
so the question about hospice volunteering, there are many different roles which volunteers can play in a hospice. I think you probably wouldn't have a direct clinical role. You'd be an employee if you had a direct clinical role, but certainly patient and family support roles, and supporting staff, and they have administration roles, fundraising, gardening, all sorts of things. There are links to 3 or 4 local hospices on the resource list.
right. Any other questions for Jeremy? Oh, thanks, Helen. Helen's doing some volunteering with Nottingham Read Easy. So something completely unrelated to GP. Well done, Helen.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So, food for thought, that is. We've got Wilford Hill, but I think we were hoping to not go that way. We'll go to the Himalayas, I think.
Jane.
So I just wanted to ask Margaret, with her volunteering for the Commonwealth Games as a doctor, presumably you still had to have a licence to practice, Margaret, and what about indemnity, etc.? Margaret listening.
Trying to unmute. Wonder if I can do it for you.
Okay, sorry. You still have to be on the performers list to do it, and indemnity is provided by the Commonwealth Games organisation. And you are a volunteer, so obviously it's totally unfunded. And for example, if you're going up to Glasgow, you've got to find your own accommodation. So there is a cost to doing it, but it is such a rewarding thing to do. I really, really enjoyed it. I did the one in Birmingham.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thanks, Jeremy. And Jeremy didn't really say very much about his role in sort of community dermatology, but that is interesting that you've sort of given up your general GP role, but have been doing that as well. So
it's like a paid hobby, Claire. I love it.
We know you're very enthusiastic. Your teaching is always excellent, Jeremy. So if anybody ever goes to Jeremy's sessions, you'll get a really good dermatology one. But again, nice that that's easier to do now that the NHS England has said that a restricted scope of practice is acceptable. So that's good. Oh, and some more volunteers. Juliet is volunteering for Careers of Bereavement Volunteer. Oh, interesting. Well done. Fantastic. Good, lovely. Thank you. Thanks so much, Jeremy. So next, I'd like to move on to Jane and Ed, who I can see have joined us. So that's excellent. Well, where have you gone? I've lost you now.
I'm here.
Oh, yes, there you are. Yeah, there you are. Okay, so I'm not sure. I'm just going to make Ed co-host as well, because I'm not sure which of you is going to share your screen. But Jane and Ed, lovely to have you with us this evening. Thank you very much. Would you like to both introduce yourself and then share your slides and let us know what research we can get involved with?
Yeah, Jane, do you want to go first? Because then I'll kick off with the slideshow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hi everybody. It's been really interesting what I've just caught at the end of there, listening to all the opportunities. Yeah, I'm Jane Coleman. I'm a GP in Elmswood Surgery in Sherwood, and I just do 4 sessions there. And then I sort of have a bit of a portfolio career that I've developed over the years, doing some research delivery. So not as an academic GP, but looking at different research studies and offering them up to patients. And then more recently had a role as it's called a research champion, to try and it's an employment role employed by the ICS, a session and a half a week, to try and sort of spread the word really about research opportunities in primary care to GPs and other healthcare professionals in primary care. I'll share that role with Ed. So I'll hand to you, Ed.
Thanks. And yeah, so I'm Ed Longridge. I'm research manager at Chilwell Valley and Meadows practice. So again, I'm not GP obviously, but we are heavily involved in research as a practice. We've done it for 20, 30 years. And personally, I've been involved in research for heading towards 20 years now in general practice. And so when I had the opportunity to be research champion in beginning of 2022, I jumped at the chance, and I've been able to work with Jane for the last 3 or 4 years now, and it's been fabulous. And so we've got this short slideshow that we can share. Now, bear with me, I'm just going to bring that up. Not quite so familiar with Zoom as Teams, so hopefully it'll go well. There we go. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. Right, I'll crack on. So, well, you know who we are now. There we go. It says it in writing. So why would we want to get involved in research? So for ourselves, there's quite a few reasons. Now, Jane and I are primarily involved in research delivery. So that means this is studies that have already been designed by and ethically approved by study teams. But this does apply, you know, if you are interested in becoming an academic GP as well, of course. But we're mainly on the delivery side of things in practice. So some of the reasons might be for contribution, improving healthcare development and patient treatment, giving your patients access to new therapies that they may not otherwise have the opportunity to get involved to receive. So, for example, as a practice, we were among the first in the world to deliver an RSV vaccination to newborn babies, which was amazing. And it's now become, I believe, part of the sort of vaccination schedule, and it's rolling out across different age groups as well. It can give you some meaning and purpose to your career, and help prevent burnout. You know, if you have something a little bit different that you can look forward to, perhaps that's outside of your normal working day, it can, you know, stave off those sort of feelings that you're just getting stuck in a rut. You can work flexibly around research. It does lend itself to being able to be done at any time, really, to suit you. There is some financial reward. It varies enormously. There's academic research where you kind of work on a pretty much a sort of a break-even basis. Although, you know, if you work hard at it and stuff, it can be more rewarding than locum work, I've heard, financially. Commercial research, of course, it's much harder, but it's much more profitable. So you've got different opportunities there in terms of your finances, but you also can get some peer and public recognition, and it can enhance your practice reputation. The CQC, for example, look on it very favorably. And also, we found this at our practice, it can actually help with recruitment and particularly retention of staff. We all know how difficult it is to keep hold of staff these days. It feels sometimes like a bit of a carousel, but you know, we had a nurse that, you know, it was a specific part of her role that she said she loved that much that, you know, that was the reason why she kind of stayed with us, was because of the research work that we do. So there's different types of research, but Jane has said she will pick up at this point and take you through some of the different studies as examples of the sorts of research that you might want to get involved in.
Great, thanks, Ed. Yeah, so the easiest type of studies that you can get involved with are just simple promotion studies. So putting up a poster in your waiting room or putting out a social media post, and then patients just see it and you're just kind of advertising it really to your patients. So this is a great study that's running, it's been running a few years now, called GLAD. They're looking at genetic links to anxiety and depression. Initially, they were just recruiting patients with anxiety or depression. They just had to send a saliva sample off and do some questionnaires. And now they've broadened out the reach to people without anxiety and depression as well. You know, and hopefully that will then inform new treatments, and who knows where it will go. So that's promoting studies. And then a little bit more complex, but again, really easy, but I find them quite interesting to do, a survey. So quite often researchers are interested to hear the views and experiences of GPs and of other staff. you can just do, they often know, like a quick online survey, sometimes a bit more detailed interviews. And this is a study that's running at the moment that I've been involved with the University of Nottingham, a local one called Empower. And they're looking at why is it that women don't seek help for pelvic floor dysfunction and urinary incontinence. So they're interviewing women, but they're also interviewing GPs and nurses to sort of see what we might think the barriers are and how we might overcome them. A little bit more complex, what we call PIC studies, so participant identification study, centre studies. So this is when you're looking for a particular cohort of patients, and the study will have some defined inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. For example, young people under 18 with depression. The searches are all designed, so it's a couple of clicks to run a search in your clinical system. And then you have a look and send out either a text, more commonly now, or letters to the people you've identified and say, are you interested in this study? You might, and then you just tell them that how to contact the study team. So your involvement ends there. So this is one we're doing at the moment that's, I think, is a really good, interesting study called Sparks. And it's actually a game. Along the bottom there, you can see these little avatars, and it's for young people under 18s with depression. And it's like a CBT basis to the game. And it's had really good results in New Zealand, but they wanted to see, is it sort of transferable to a UK population? So we're just recruiting to this at the moment. And then, recruiting studies. So they're the ones that are a bit more detailed, where you actually consent a patient into the trial yourself. You may do some kind of intervention with them, like prescribing or taking samples or recording different measurements. You can do that yourself, or you can use research nurses in your practice, or there are research nurses available that can come into your practice from a central team. So this is a study we've just started called Coral, and there's some evidence that coenzyme Q can be beneficial for patients with heart failure, and it's exploring that more. So we'll be prescribing them coenzyme Q, and then patients with heart failure fill out questionnaires. So that's all the different kinds of studies, and I guess as well as for ourselves, we're doing it for the patients, aren't we, really? And that in itself is really rewarding. Patients report, improvements with their health. They're getting access to stuff they wouldn't normally get access to. They enjoy the feeling of helping others, helping the NHS, and they get, they're generally, when they're surveyed, say they really enjoyed taking part in research, which makes it quite rewarding. And it is something that you can do as you're retiring and, moving into retirement. Obviously, you need to be on the register still. You can't do it otherwise, but you could think about maybe dropping a clinical session and then doing this, at a low level, building it up. So me and Ed can support anybody that was interested in exploring that. And in Derbyshire and Lincolnshire, there are other regional research champions there. So we could link you up with them if you're not in Nottinghamshire. So yeah, that's all we thought we'd talk about. It's just a short whistle-stop tour, but if you need or are interested, you can email us, and welcome any questions if there are any now.
Thanks very much, both. That's really interesting. And what's quite nice is that you can sort of choose your level of involvement, isn't it? There's something for everybody there. Yeah. Any questions for Jane or Ed? No. Lisa, you look like you're coming in.
No, oh, thank you for that. It was really interesting. I mean, I wonder whether practices that got a lot of research, it tends to be sort of in practices that are already doing it, whether you can get involved or whether you can get involved in other practices that are involved. Because I think my practice used to be quite involved in research. It's kind of gone by the wayside, and our research nurse left. So I was interested in it, but actually I didn't have enough momentum to do it on my own. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah. So what were you saying? Could you do it at another practice? Or...
I don't know if there's any scope for that, because I think getting up and running, because I think the practice was quite well established. We had people on track, and there were various things coming in. But I think once that lapses, to get it back up and running in a practice requires a certain degree of commitment and future planning and all of that kind of thing. Getting all the regulations, remember all the sort of the regulatory stuff and things, whether or not you can link into it. As a sort of
yeah. I mean, it's easier than
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's easier than you think to do it yourself. I mean, all GPs have all the skills they need already. It's dead easy. there is a little bit of training that you can do to make sure that you got everything covered, called Good Clinical Practice Training, which just takes 3 hours. It's free on NIHR Learn, but and then you're kind of good to go. That's it really. But in terms of working with other practices, there are some schemes currently. We're trying to look at sort of collaborative working across PCNs. So within your PCN, there may be a practice who'd be willing to sort of take you on to do stuff, or if you just think, if anyone here thinks I'd like to do it but I've no clue how to do it and want more of an in-depth chat, we can come up with loads of different suggestions and different ways that you could work. I'm sure we'd know someone, or we could mentor you ourselves, because that's within our remit really to support people. But it really is incredibly easy, and I think really quite rewarding to feel that you're making that extra contribution to people's healthcare and giving them some things that they couldn't do otherwise.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jane and Ed. That's definitely food for thought. And thank you for the invitation for a in-depth chat. If anybody is thinking about it and wants to, take up your offer, then we'll share out your contact details as well. Brilliant.
Great,
thank you so much.
Thanks. Cheers.
So moving on, Jane Selwyn, I'd like to invite you to come and unmute. Oh, there you are. You have already. Lovely. And would you like to introduce yourself, Jane, and tell us a bit about the RCGP?
Okay, so Jane Selwyn, I was a full-time senior partner at a practice in Newark, and I retired in 2018 after 27 years there, and I'd previously done 10 years of hospital medicine before that. I returned to work in December 2020 as part of the pandemic, working under the emergency registration practitioner status, and that was in the NOTS COVID-19 vaccination programme. Firstly as a medical lead, and then as its clinical director. And I finally retired for good in March last year after 3 and a bit years. So retirement, it's allowed me to engage with the Royal College of GPs. I've been a member since 1989 and made very, very little use of the college. But in retirement, it allowed me to join the Vale of Trent Faculty Board. And for 3 years, I was its honorary secretary. And I'm now what we call the LCARM lead, which is the Late Career and Retired Members lead. And I'm also deputy rep on council. And in fact, I attended the last council meeting at the Royal College last Friday, which I found absolutely fascinating. Loved it. So as the LCARM lead, been involved in lots of local initiatives, educational events, lots of social events, walks and lunches and cultural visits, etc. But I'm also quite involved in national initiatives. So as a national group of LCARM leads, we're pretty vociferous at the college. And currently we're developing a support package for those aim to help those at career transitions, including their later careers and in retirement. So obviously people who want to reduce their volume and scope of practice, those who want to work outside core general practice, those who want to take a break, whether it's a career break, parental leave or sickness leave, and those who want to retire completely. And we're planning to publish all this on the website. The other thing I'm involved in at the college is I sit on the Professional Standards Working Group. And at the moment, we're trying to develop guidance around the issues and confusion around the performance list regulations and how responsible officers interpret and implement these across the UK. How do you remain fit for practice? How do you navigate the requirements and the regulations? We need some more consistency and clarity for doctors. So there's lots of areas of confusion, such as the GMC register, license to practice, being on the GP register and the performance list, and how each of these areas is managed. How many sessions are required to stay registered and connected? What counts as core general practice and which roles require a license to practice, being on a performance list, etc. I was going to say, interestingly enough, Lisa, from your comments about the 40 clinical sessions, that apparently that 40 clinical session threshold was actually meant as a prompt for reflection, not actually as a minimal annual session requirement. I'm sure you know all that.
I do, and I think that's right, because I think you actually literally only have to do one bit of work. It doesn't have to be 40 sessions, but I think from an appraisal point of view, if people do less than that, whilst you can do a structured reflection, I think that you have to demonstrate quite well how you're keeping up to date if you're doing less than that. Whereas if you're above that, it's kind of there's a given that you've got a certain amount of knowledge that you're just acquiring from doing it regularly. So it's not an absolute cutoff. Definitely, I'm sorry if I misrepresented that, but I think
no, you haven't at all. No, I just think it's interesting. I think it's interpreted probably differently in different areas potentially, which I think is causing confusion.
It is.
So that's my work with Royal College. I mean, the other thing I did was actually in retirement, I actually applied for and was awarded fellowship of the college, which I found to be a really rewarding experience, very cathartic. It allowed me to reflect on my career, gave me some affirmation, some closure, which I endured, and I would encourage anyone to apply for fellowship. I'm currently president of the Nottingham Med Chi. I'm a safeguarding governor for a primary school. I'm a trustee of 2 medical related charities, secretary of my local PCC at the moment. So lots and lots of roles. And I think all these are helping with the inevitable, which I think retirement does herald, that loss of identity, that loss of sense of purpose, that loss of learning, that loss of influence, the loss of social interaction, teamwork, and some feelings of financial insecurity. So I would just like to encourage people to continue to be members of the RCGP. It's £157 per year as a retired member. I think you get, it gives you advice, support, learning, socialisation, opportunities to influence, and opportunities to give back, to impart some of your wisdom and experience, expertise, even though you might feel like you're a dinosaur. And I would also like to encourage people to apply for fellowship. Interestingly, I did actually, just before I retired last March, I did actually apply for another job. And in fact, it was quite a long application process with I had to write a flipping CV, which I've not done for many, many years. Have an interview, and then they let us, had an interview in May, and then they let us know the outcome of the application process in November. And this was for a fee-paid medical member of the first tier tribunal, which is for the Social Entitlement Chamber. Basically, it's for benefits tribunals. And it looked a really interesting job. But, you know, by the time I got to November, I thought, sod it, I don't need to work anymore. I don't want to work anymore. And for the first time in my life, I actually turned something down. I felt really emboldened. It was fantastic. Anyway, but for that job, you only need to be on the GMC register. You don't need to be on the performance list. You don't need a license to practice. So there we go. That's what I've got to say, really.
Thank you very much, Jane. That's what an interesting portfolio of stuff that you're doing now that you've hung up with Stethoscope. That's really gives you food for thought there. Any questions for Jane? Anything about any of the roles that she's mentioned?
No, but it's an amazing list. Goodness, you sound very busy, but that's great.
Yes, I am. But that's good.
But that's how you like it, so that's good.
I like it. That's always what I've done. And so you just
I think the thing is, we're all busy people, aren't we? We spend a lot of time being busy, and then it's afterwards thinking, I just be busy with something different. That's great.
I'm just non-paid business now.
There is that, yes, but money's just a construct, isn't it?
Thank you so much, Jane. That's brilliant. Gail, would you like to unmute yourself and tell us all about what Derbyshire Hub Plus can offer?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm on my phone, so I hope that doesn't cause any problems with the sound. It's happened every time on these Zoom meetings. Zoom excitedly joins me, sees Claire, gets really excited, and then my laptop sort of explodes. So apologies about that. Yeah, I thought I'd briefly tell you a bit about my experience leading up to retirement, and then tell you about Hub Plus. So very briefly about me, I worked in a big general practice as a GP partner for 34 years in Ilkeston. I retired clinically. Well, in 3 days' time, it will be 3 years since I retired. I was very definite that I didn't want to work clinically anymore. If I had done, it would have been in the field of LARCs and women's health. But having had conversations, having been an appraiser and having had numerous conversations with various ROs over the years about limited scope appraisal, at that time it wasn't really going to work. So I immediately came off the performers list. I was very clear I wanted to do that, and I haven't regretted it. But over the course of my career, I'd always worked not that many clinical sessions, 5 clinical sessions, but always filled in some of the other sessions with more flexible approaches to working. So over the years, I've been a GPSI in drugs misuse. I've been an appraiser since appraisals first started. I was an appraisal lead for our area. I've been on the LMC. Through that, I'd done some performance review work. I worked for the RCGP as what they then call practice support. So, you know, those early days of CQC, when there was this realisation that if we'd got practices that, for want of a better term, failed, that had an effect on all of us. You know, the surrounding practices would equally well start to hit difficulties. So that was really fascinating work. That involved going usually with a practice manager advisor, plus sometimes the practice nurse advisor, to practices to do scoping exercises and to come up with an action plan. Totally non-critical of the practice, because in all the practices I visited, there was only one where I thought, oh dear, I wouldn't want to be a patient here. Everybody else had just become overwhelmed with jumping through, you know, some of the hoops and expressing what they were doing well. So I thoroughly enjoyed doing that work. I worked alongside fantastic colleagues, and I would recommend, apart from the pay is poor, but I would recommend that kind of work, because those are skills we've all got, to sit back, have a little look at what someone else is doing. You always learn a whole load of stuff. What else did I do? I helped back in the days when we did our own night work. I helped set up the East Derbyshire GP Cooperative. That was a great time. And I've always been interested in the business side of general practice. So we also had a new surgery build, and I was the lead partner for that. From the LMC, when it was still GP Task Force, I started working for GP Task Force, and still do. Now, as you'll probably be aware, that has merged, and the merged entity with the training hub is now called Hub Plus. And my role within that has been in the area of GP retention with a small r, as opposed to Lisa's big R, I think. Trying to retain GPs within Derbyshire. And a lot of that we've found comes from giving people an outlet, something different that looks a bit different to the day job. So the fellowship side of stuff, be it new to practice scheme, which on behalf of Hub Plus I've helped run and manage that, or fellowship working that comes from different pots of money that Susie Bailey, our medical director, manages to find and put into fellowships, or the Trailblazer fellowships, which, as you're probably aware, are NHSE funded. to encourage us as GPs, and now fortunately as non-GP clinicians. So I've had my first ANP as a Trailblazer Fellow this year. Whether that will continue with NHSE funding, who knows, but we plod on, and we should be hearing very soon how many places will be offered for the next October cohort. Again, the remit of that has increased. It was aimed at first 5 GPs, but now it's mid-career. So I think as long as somebody's, you know, probably under 80, let's have a look at the application. So I like that. It's been a transition into full retirement. The other things I've done along the way, I've been a great advocate of saying, oh, that looks interesting. That's how I got the GPSI role. That's how I got most of the roles. But I think if you're that sort of person, you also have to think, how do I say no when either life gets too busy or it's the wrong thing? And actually, oh, that looks interesting as well. Actually, I'm not interested personally in that. And I think, you know, going into things, being open that you will do it, but you might make yourself too busy. I was a trustee at our local hospice, a role that came through a conversation when I was looking for them to take one of the fellows under their wings. And because I live across the road from Treetops Hospice, I got asked to be a trustee when one of the other doctors was stepping down. And I did that for about 6 years. Again, I would recommend it. You don't need to be on the performers list, but there is reading of clinical policies and documents and advising on those. I purely felt that I didn't have the time that it deserves. So I've given up on that at this moment in time. Who knows? I might go back in 4 or 5 years. Like Jeremy was saying, volunteering is a great thing to do. Our church runs a warm space, so I cook there 65 to 70 lunches most weeks during the 6 months of the winter into spring months. That in itself works with we've got refugees still in our Best Western Hotel in Long Eaton, and we're now trying to support refugee families as well. So I smell of onions at the moment. I've got a cottage pie halfway through prep, so apologies. Well, I'm glad you can't smell me. What else do we do? One of my recommendations is think of, is there a biggish project or something in mind that is flexible? So there's always something there to keep you busy if you want to be busy and you haven't got anything for that day. I suppose my best example of that is my husband, who's not a medic. He was an engineer and then did something else and retired when I did. Has always wanted to build a AC Cobra replica. So he has got in the garage a car that he's building, and well, he's in there now. It keeps him busy when he wants to be busy. But because it's 3 years on and we've still got the chassis separate from the body, you can tell that often it's like, oh, well, doing something else. So that's a bit about us. I'd say think about a project. Think if you want to have a lot of structure in your day or a little. How flexible can you be? I suppose another example of that is my mum was a teacher, and when she retired, she said, I'd really like to do yoga. So we found, you know, there wasn't a lot of yoga in Doncaster at that time, but I found a yoga group. And then she said, oh, do you know, I don't want a timetable every week. So, you know, how much do you want? And will that change? You know, when you first retire, do you want something quite structured that then you give yourself permission to say, no, I don't want to do that actually this week. So what does Hub Plus do, and what can it offer you? There's a lot of stuff there that you'll know about if you're Derbyshire based. So there's regular education sessions, and even if you're not working clinically, you may well, like my wonderful partner who sadly died last year, just short of age 90, he read the BMJ every week and was very conversant with it. You know, so there's education available. Equally, we're wanting educators, going back to the point about us merging with the training hub. Susie and Claire, the directors, are very much looking at how do you make it a very slick, very easy to use organisational structure. Some of the education overlapped, and what a lot of the fellows have said is that as part of the fellowship, they've provided, say, one-off sessions at what we call Quest. I think you call them PLP sessions still, in Nottinghamshire. And one-offs are good, but actually how much does it impact somebody's clinical practice? So what we're starting to think about is there theme, I was going to say theme preaching there, we're in a series of Lent theme preaching at church, theme studies and teaching, and shared learning. So around dermatology, Jeremy is going to be doing some new to practice teaching for us as a one-off in a month or so. But is there a series that we can do at that primary secondary care interface level? There's still very strong conversations in Derbyshire about that, and is it better to take sections of work, whether it's the things we refer most in, so respiratory, cardiology, dermatology, and really try and provide a lot more around that. And so if you've got thoughts about that or want to offer to do some of that teaching and work in a very well established but evolving system at Hub Plus. I was talking today to Pav, who's just joined a few months ago. She comes from a teaching background. She's taught for 10 years, but she's now working at Hub Plus, looking at education from a slightly different dynamic. So that's very helpful. We've got coaching and mentoring available to everyone, and if anybody working in Derbyshire clinically wanted some mentoring sessions, then that is available. I think I've probably gone on enough, Claire, but if people want to talk to me offline, the emails will be circulated, so please feel free to. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. Nice to get your own kind of personal experience as well, and the personal roles that you've held as well. And obviously, if there are Derbyshire GPs here, then please do get in touch with Gail. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to share my screen once again and see if I can get here. So, yeah, unfortunately, Kevin Thomas, who's the Lincolnshire Training Hub, was not able to join us tonight, but I believe that there are leadership fellowships available for Lincolnshire GPs, and there is something called the LMC Coaching Sessions Take 30, which may be available to Lincolnshire GPs. If people have got any specific needs in thinking about their late career and retirement, then the best thing to do is to get in touch with Kevin. And he said that he'd be quite happy to arrange to have a talk, okay, about what you actually need. So sorry that somebody can't talk to you directly. You probably, well, most of you will know that I'm the mid and senior career lead for the Nottingham Phoenix programme, which is similar to the Derbyshire Hub Plus. We support GPs at all stages of careers, right through from ST3s up until sort of retired GPs. And now we're also looking after some of our non-clinical workforce as well. So we do things like locum GP support and events. So for anybody who's thinking about doing some locum work in late career or retirement, you're very welcome to join all of those events. We have our mid and senior career GP fellowships, and more about that in a moment. And we link in with PCN and Federation work as well. So specific to Nottingham, we offer senior career fellowship projects, and these were born out of a conversation that we had with a number of GPs that were about to retire or had recently retired about 4 or 5 years ago. And many of them said that they were coming to the end of their career. They had a lot of knowledge, wisdom, institutional memory, that kind of thing. But they wanted really to pass that on and share it with people as they were sort of going into retirement stages. So our fellowship projects came out of that conversation, and the projects that people choose to do tend to be something that will be supportive either of colleagues in general practice or the primary care workforce, or for their local primary care network or local systems. And people have said that it helps them to transition into retirement. Generally speaking, it's a paid project work, either for 2 sessions per week, okay, for 6 months, or it's for 1 session per week over 12 months, though we can be flexible with that. The project is usually something suggested by the fellow themselves, or can be co-created with either their local network or with their practice. And again, it should be based on local system needs, and particularly thinking about supporting or giving back. And so we've said really workforce issues, workload and well-being are the kind of big themes to address. And these have involved things like education and mentoring support. They've involved helping mental health practitioners get into a new role. And there's been projects working across the primary secondary care divide. And that's been quite helpful to sort of foster and build relationships between primary and secondary care, which are really important at the moment. So that's all I want to say about that. I thought we might just spend the next 10 minutes just thinking about either some small things that you could do that could be the first steps towards developing your late GP career or journey into retirement, or thinking about what you can change in your current job to help you in some way prepare for retirement. So feel free to take a photo of that if you wish. Or if you prefer just to have a chat about what you've heard, okay, any reflections, any thoughts, anything that you might put into practice. And I'm going to stop sharing now and just get you into some breakout rooms. I'm sure you probably found that's probably not anywhere near long enough to discuss some of the things that that you've heard tonight. Any kind of reflections or anything, any themes that have come out that were important from the discussions?
I think we reflected on how many and varied things there were that we could do, and I think I reflected that I think it's quite difficult to reinvent yourself in a practice. We were talking about, because I changed from being a partner to being clinical lead to being salaried doctor, nearly retiring, and I think that's quite a hard transition within a practice. You feel like you're practicing at changing your status within a practice. I think that that's a stepping stone to changing how you feel about things generally. But I think that's something that I've been reflecting on really. I think we all decided that being a DWP assessor was probably out of the frying pan into the fire. It didn't sound very much laughs, and I didn't think that would be top on my list of things to do when I was thinking about leaving clinical practice. That was my reflection, but there were many positive opportunities, but I didn't perceive that was one that particularly appealed to me, or the group actually. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn from the group. We decided that was no.
Lisa's off to the Himalayas, aren't you, Lisa?
Yeah, I was very I was looking at the Himalayas and thinking, as long as my knees don't give out, that's what I want to do, get to retirement with 2 knees intact, and then I'll go to the Himalayas as well.
Well, just make sure you don't get altitude sickness.
Yeah. Go slow and steady. I'll start from the bottom and work my way up.
Come along with me on my next trip.
Careful what you wish for. We could go for a group. Yeah, absolutely.
We could. Group excursion to the Himalayas sounds perfect.
Yeah. Bit of teaching on the way sounds good to me.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully tonight's session's given you a bit of food for thought. I just want to finally share my screen just to share a couple of resources. So just to remind you, first of all, As Gail has already alluded to, so this can be a transition phase where sometimes sort of thinking about coaching can be quite helpful to consider your options. So free coaching and mentoring is available through the GPS for Nottingham GPs and through the Hub Plus for Derbyshire. If you're from Lincoln, then get in touch with Kevin and have a chat with him about what's available. And then there's quite a few books that may be of interest. All of the slides will be shared with you, so I'm not going to go through them, but you can have a look and see if anything is of interest there too. And really, just want to say a huge thank you to all of the people who've joined us this evening. It's been great to have so many people. I only wish we'd had longer to have had a bit more interaction, a bit more discussion. But I hope it's given you sort of a flavour of the kind of things that you might consider. And having heard about all the various people and all the different roles that they have got themselves involved with in their late career and in retirement, and in fact all the roles that people are doing as they're still working, hopefully that's whet your appetite. Thank you to all those people who have attended the previous sessions as well. All of the sessions that have been recorded and all of the resources will be shared afterwards. Will certainly be available on the Nottingham Phoenix programme, and perhaps Gail can confirm if it's going to be available through Derbyshire Hub Plus as well. If there's anything that you still need to know or any further support you need as a late career GP or heading into retirement, please do contact your area lead. So that's myself in Nottingham or Gail in Derby and Kevin in Lincolnshire. And info is also available on the RCGP website as well. You will see that the final slide has got a QR code, and also in the chat is a feedback link. We really do value your feedback and would love to know how you found these sessions, particularly tonight's, so that we can change it and make it even better for the next time. So if you can give us a couple of minutes of your time, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to stop sharing. We have got literally 1 minute until I start stealing your time. So anybody got any final reflections before you head on your way?
Thanks, Claire. It's been brilliant. Really good session. Thank you. Lots of food for thought to reflect on.
Absolutely.
I'd just say, as Jane mentioned, being a school governor, you know, if you're not a school governor, have a think about it, because schools and general practice in particular are so similar. You know, people look at a school and think all it does is provide lessons, and people look at general practice and think, oh, we provide your appointments, and actually the infrastructures have so much more to them. But you do have some transferable skills into that setting, so I'd recommend thinking about that as well.
Good. Well, thank you all. It's been great to have hosted these sessions. I hope you've all got something out of it anyway. And if there's anything left outstanding, do get in touch with your leads. But anyway, have a lovely rest of the evening and hope to catch you on our next series. Otherwise, see you around in Nottingham, Derby or Lincoln. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.